The appearance of people was a serious, if I may say so, stressful event, especially for the young Lykovs. It would be fine if they had to see and communicate with any of the people. But this is a special case. The two elders, Savin and Natalya, saw and remembered people, but practically did not have to communicate with them. The younger ones, Agafia and Dmitry, as I already wrote, have never seen people. Naturally, they could not truly imagine the faces of people, clothes, the manner of communication with each other, etc. Of course, they knew a lot about people from the stories of their parents, but throughout their lives they were inspired. With peace we cannot. And at once, like a snow on their heads, 4 people, 3 men and 1 woman. People, from whom they had been hiding all their lives, suddenly found themselves nearby, and not with some bad intentions, but with kindness and respect. One can only guess what the Lykov sisters, especially Agafia, experienced when these people boldly and at the same time modestly entered their gloomy home. For Savin and Dmitry, this event took place as if with preparation. As soon as the geologists who came for the first time left, Karp Lykov immediately informed his sons that people had found them. He probably told them in detail about everything that had happened, and about how to behave, etc. In a word, the secret life was over, and now it was necessary, whether they wanted it or not, to adapt to a different way of life. And the next year, about 15 to 20 kilometers from the Lykovs' dwelling, a geological exploration party began to work thoroughly. Iron ore was discovered here, and the Minnescent complex expedition launched activities to clarify reserves, development opportunities and other aspects related to exploration of this deposit. The settlement of geologists is located on the banks of the Bolshoi-Bokan River at the confluence of the Karasu River. By this time, the party workers who had been abandoned here already knew that in those places where they would have to work, a family of old believers had been living for more than 40 years, whose surname was inscribed on their maps. The leadership of the expedition immediately began to provide all kinds of assistance to the Lykov family. The leadership of the Caucasus Regional Forestry Department, headed by Nikolai Nikolaevich Savushin, did not stand aside either. We must pay tribute to this man who did a lot to help this family. Unfortunately, I was not able to get to know or see him, but I used word of mouth. They all did a lot to improve their life. It was expressed in building a house, in providing tools, clothing, some food, and in chores. Most of the party workers showed great interest in this family and, at the first opportunity, tried to visit their home, to see with their own eyes that all this is reality, and not someone's fairy tales. I wanted to see these hermits ourselves. Some sincerely sympathized with the Lykovs, some out of idle curiosity, and some for show, so that later in Philistine conversations they would say that they had seen and know well these people, and draw their own conclusions. Knowing that the Lykovs do not have much of what is necessary for a normal life, everyone tried to help them with something. We must also pay tribute to the many who met with the Lykovs. All of them reacted with understanding to the tragedy of this family and, in every possible way helping them to understand a completely new life for them, involuntarily became, as it were, curators, guardians. Everyone wanted to do something pleasant for them, teach them something, give them something, etc. Almost everything was a wonder for the Lykovs. Clothes, dishes, various household items, food, new incomprehensible words, names and much more. But cars, machine tools, helicopters, electricity, TV, undoubtedly, amazed the imagination, and things happened in the minds that made you think about many things that remained behind the back of life and which now, with all the desire to turn, is no longer possible. One can only state all this as a fact, but no more. From all this, they remained aloof and at a distance that could no longer be conquered. The young Lykovs often began to appear in the settlement of geologists. They wanted to see something new, but the main thing that was difficult to cope with was their craving for people, craving for communication. They wanted to look at the faces of men and women and talk, and with everyone the visit broadened their horizons. They learned a lot from the fact that throughout their lives they did not know at all what was in their minds behind the barrier of their thinking. And all this not only amazed and worried, but they probably began to look at their personal lives from a different point of view. Of course, they wondered why everyone can, but they can't. During frequent conversations with people, they began to understand that much of what was suggested to them and what was forbidden turned out to be not quite true, and the peace about which they were told that we cannot be in peace is not explaining why. He turned out to be kind, friendly, and did not carry anything except kindness and respect. Gradually, the young Lykovs got used to it, and, despite the stormy flow of information that surged like a swift mountain river, they began to understand a lot. They understood perfectly well that everything they had to face and what to see was the creation of people like themselves. In a word, they comprehended a lot rather quickly, and it could not be otherwise. Normal mental development, ingenuity, natural ingenuity helped to comprehend everything that caused surprise. They gratefully accepted everything that the inhabitants of the settlement of geologists offered them. These were household items, clothes, shoes, fishing tackle, etc. In the village, they saw young men and women, saw married couples, and this, undoubtedly, excited the mind, especially since people told them directly that they could live the same way as everyone else, have a family, children, if their father would not have made this terrible fatal mistake, hiding behind the fact that, in peace we cannot. And it was precisely the questions of marriage, family, the desire to have their own children that were, perhaps, the main reasons for their disappointment and painful thoughts. The sisters found a common language with the women, eagerly listened to their arguments, and in turn, talked about their difficult life. The eldest, Savin, who experienced any adversity most of all, was averse to the new more than all other family members. Apparently, the suggestions that the head of the family repeated throughout his life, hiding behind faith, and his personal memories were so entrenched in his consciousness that it was very difficult to rethink all this. The youngest, Dmitry, on the contrary, was drawn to people, to everything new, was interested in literally everything, and, as the inhabitants of the village said, sooner or later he would go into the world. Dmitry was the first to taste worldly food, in particular, bread, porridge, condensed milk, and admitted that he liked it. The young Lykovs did not shine with health. There was never milk, eggs, ordinary bread in their diet. There were no major vegetables, carrots, cabbage, beets, tomatoes. There was never any fruit, and what is hunger, they experienced more than once. In addition, they spent most of their lives literally in the twilight. For their entire closet, in which they lived, a tiny window about 10 by 15 centimeters, capable of giving light only to distinguish objects and not collide with each other. And the family spent about 70% of their time, if not more, in this small, gloomy, black-walled dwelling. Therefore, as the residents of the village noted, they looked pale, men with thin beards. They did not differ in any strength, density and strength of constitution. What could not be said about the head of the family, who looked quite normal for his age, was strong and healthy. He grew up in normal peasant conditions, where there was never a shortage of everything that the Siberian peasants used. Gradually, people began to get used to each other, and it seemed that a certain time would pass, and much in their life would fall into place. Relatives of co-religionists began to visit the Lykovs, who also tried to open their eyes to the environment, to the laws, in a word, to the life that had become the norm of the whole society. But life's fate again, for the umpteenth time, has made its ominous adjustments. This short development of friendly and useful, primarily for the Lykov family, relations unexpectedly ended tragically. In the fall of 1981, Dmitry suddenly fell ill and died a few days later. And although there was an opportunity to seek help from a doctor who offered her services, the Lykovs did not do this, explaining, everything is God's will. And 2 months later, Savin and Natalya died within 10 days, and they also did not seek help from a doctor. Did Karp Lykov understand that even here, when the children were on their deathbed, he, not allowing them to see a doctor, involuntarily contributed to their death? Had the doctors had time to help and save the sick or not, it's hard to say, but everyone's conscience would be clear. But let's leave the reproaches, the fact has come true. At all times, from ancient times, peasants who fell ill with any disease turned to a local healer for help and did not see any sin in this. The cause of death of 3 Lykovs at once is contact with people. The Lykovs have lived all their lives in the pure dark coniferous taiga, where there were and could not be any pathogenic bacteria due to the fact that the air in the taiga is filled with so-called phytoncides. These volatile substances, emitted by plants, especially by conifers, literally saturate the air, and the Lykovs were not in danger. Figuratively speaking, throughout their lives they were, as it were, in an absolutely sterile capsule, which generally weakened the immune system, since they had never been attacked by any diseases, so their bodies were completely unable to withstand any, if I may say so, the slightest infection. And in the environment in which they found themselves, meeting people, among whom there could be carriers of various infectious diseases, the Lykovs turned out to be precisely those objects with which any infection was not difficult to cope with. This, without a doubt, so, and there could be no other reasons. But what kind of diseases it was that so easily knocked down, it seemed, strong organisms, now we no longer know. In addition, an important role was played by that stressful state, a nervous shock when people who came in peace burst into their lives with a cannonball, the same as themselves, but completely different. The only thing that the Lykovs could never get sick with is tick-borne encephalitis. Inhabitants of all Taiga villages, Zamek never got sick with encephalitis, although from an early age, from infancy, they were exposed to tick bites. We all pulled dozens of ticks out of our bodies every spring every year. Ticks were pulled out of cows, horses, dogs by the hundreds. Obviously, the ticks themselves, biting us, gave us vaccinations, or so, in any case, the doctors explained to us. 7 years later, in 1988, Karp Lykov died. He died at the age of 87 on the same day and month in which his wife Agafia Lykova died back in 1961, that is, February 16. Agafia Lykova said that in the last days and hours of his life, Karp Lykov, in a semi-conscious state, tried to go somewhere. Thinking over the last hours of his life, I come to the conclusion that even in such a state, the instinct of self-preservation worked, and he tried to get away from everything and everyone. This is how a lonely family ended its existence, who knew where it lived, abandoned everything earthly for some reason. Only one youngest daughter, Agafia, remained, who, referring to the fact that the Tianka did not give blessings, categorically refused to go to her relatives who offered her a good place of residence, including promised to cut down a house and equip an economy. While in the village of Kilensk, where Agafia was staying with her close relatives at the time, I took part in long conversations with Agafia, along with Paskov and a group of local fellow believers. All our persuasions, proposals to move to relatives for a residence had no effect. Agafia was adamant, and you can understand her. And it was evident that our persuasions were painfully reflected in her soul. She stayed in her native place, where she was born and raised. And this would be done, perhaps, by everyone who would be in her place. In any case, I personally agree with her decision. She knows this life to the smallest detail, knows what, where and when to do. She is not busy with hard work. She knows how to do everything in the life in which she found herself. She does not know another life, and she will not be able to rebuild in a different way. And it is also important that, being in the midst of people, she can, with her health, at any time become a victim of any infection. I will not repeat what I have said many times. I will say one thing, that now is a different time, and she is practically not threatened by a lack of food, clothing and other things. People helped, and the main role in that help and in the fact that all of Russia learned about the tragedy of this family, of course, belongs primarily to Paskov, who tactfully and thoroughly told the world about what happened in the Taiga wilderness of the Western Sayan Mountains. In a word, Agafia Lykova will never leave her birthplace anywhere. Moreover, in the place where she lives and around her there are, according to my calculations, at least 11 graves, where the people closest and dearest to her heart are buried. She stayed near them. Here the difficult and inherently rare life path of this long-suffering family from the Lykov family will end. Once, in a circle of friends, during a conversation about the fate of the Lykovs, when I was talking about what I know myself and what eyewitnesses told me about their life, my good friend, a sociologist, said that the tragedy of the Lykov family is an echo of the split and the October Revolution. It seems to me that he hit the mark. Now Agafia Lykova is surrounded by attention, she is helped in many ways, and in this respect, thank God, everything is fine. All attempts to add someone to her in order to smooth out the loneliness ended in failure. These attempts will never be successful. Now there is no one who could easily endure these conditions, the hardships of life, and be 100% like-minded. There are simply no such people, even among fellow believers there is hardly anyone. I mean, no one will be able to live there the way she lives for the simple reason that there is no other life around and no common language can be found. Please share this video on your social networks, using the buttons under the video and subscribe to the channel. I ask you to go and watch other videos about Agafia Lykova, which you can see now on the screen in the end screensavers. There are a lot of rare and interesting facts about the Hermit. Thank you all for watching.